The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Dusty Creek, Texas, as Sarah Mitchell stepped down from the stagecoach, her worn leather satchel clutched tightly in her gloved hands. The September heat was already oppressive, and her dark blue traveling dress clung uncomfortably to her slim frame. At 22, Sarah had left the comfort of Boston to bring education to the frontier, driven by a sense of duty her late father had instilled in her. "This here's where you'll be teaching, miss." The gruff stagecoach driver pointed toward a weathered wooden building with a hand-painted sign reading Dusty Creek School. The structure looked smaller than the chicken coop back home, but Sarah squared her shoulders with determination. Sheriff Tom Bradley emerged from his office across the street, his star catching the sunlight. A thick-set man in his mid-40s with graying hair and cold blue eyes, he approached with measured steps, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "You must be the new schoolmarm from back east," Bradley said, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Name's Sheriff Bradley. Word of advice, keep to yourself and don't go wandering off alone. We've been having trouble with Comanche raids lately." Sarah nodded politely, though something in the sheriff's tone unsettled her. "Thank you for the warning, Sheriff. I'm here to teach children, nothing more." 2 weeks later, Sarah had settled into a routine. Her small schoolhouse filled each morning with eager faces, the baker's twin daughters, the blacksmith's son, and several ranch children who rode in from miles away. She had also begun treating minor injuries with the medical supplies her physician father had taught her to use, earning the gratitude of several families. On this particular morning, Sarah was gathering wildflowers for a botany lesson when she heard the thundering of hooves and desperate cries in the distance. Cresting a small hill, she saw smoke rising from the railroad construction camp 2 miles south. As she approached cautiously, the acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air. Behind a cluster of boulders, she discovered a young Comanche warrior, no more than 16, with a bullet wound in his shoulder. Blood seeped through his buckskin shirt as he struggled to remain conscious. Sarah's medical training overrode any fear. She couldn't watch someone suffer when she had the skills to help. Working quickly, she cleaned the wound with water from her canteen and applied pressure with strips torn from her petticoat. The boy's dark eyes fluttered open, filled with pain, but not hostility. "Easy now," she whispered, bandaging the wound with practiced hands. "You're going to be all right." She helped him to his horse, a magnificent paint stallion that had been grazing nearby. The young warrior managed to mount with her assistance, pressing a small carved bone pendant into her palm before riding off toward the hills. Sarah watched until he disappeared, then hurried back to town, unaware that railroad foreman Jake Morrison had been watching through his spyglass from a distant ridge. That evening, as Sarah graded arithmetic papers by lamplight, heavy boots stomped across her schoolhouse porch. Sheriff Bradley burst through the door without knocking, followed by Morrison and 3 other men with grim expressions. "Sarah Mitchell, you're under arrest for aiding and abetting enemy combatants," Bradley announced, his voice echoing in the small room. Sarah's pencil clattered to the floor. "I beg your pardon? What are you talking about?" Morrison stepped forward, his weathered face twisted with anger. "Don't play innocent, lady. You were seen treating a wounded Comanche after they attacked our camp. That makes you a collaborator." "I helped an injured boy," Sarah said, rising slowly from her chair. "It's my Christian duty to aid anyone who's hurt, regardless of—" "Regardless of nothing," Bradley interrupted, producing iron shackles. "You gave aid to savages who killed 2 of our men and stole a dozen horses. That's treason in my book." Sarah's hands trembled as the cold metal closed around her wrists. "This is madness. I'm a schoolteacher. You were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong sympathies," Bradley growled, pushing her toward the door. "Judge Harrison arrives next week for the circuit court. You'll wait in my jail until then." The jail cell was barely 6 feet by 8 feet, with a single barred window and a straw mattress that reeked of previous occupants. As the iron door clanged shut, Sarah sank onto the crude wooden bench, struggling to comprehend how quickly her world had collapsed. Outside, she could hear the townspeople gathering, their voices growing increasingly hostile. "String her up now!" someone shouted. "Can't trust no Indian lover." Sheriff Bradley appeared at her cell door, his expression mixing satisfaction with something darker. "You picked the wrong side, schoolmarm. This town needs to send a message that we won't tolerate traitors." As night fell over Dusty Creek, Sarah pressed her face against the cold iron bars, staring at the distant hills where the Comanche warrior had disappeared. She clutched the bone pendant he had given her, wondering if anyone would ever believe her story, or if she would simply become another casualty of the hatred consuming the frontier. 3 days had passed since Sarah's arrest. and the cramped cell had become her entire world. The September heat made the small space stifling during the day, while nights brought a bone-chilling cold that seeped through the stone walls. Sheriff Bradley provided only stale bread and murky water twice daily, barely enough to sustain her. Sarah sat on the rough wooden bench, her once pristine dress now wrinkled and stained. The bone pendant from the young warrior remained hidden in her palm, her only connection to hope in this nightmare. Through the barred window, she could see townspeople gathering in small groups, their hostile glances confirming that public sentiment had turned completely against her. "You're looking mighty pale, schoolmarm," Bradley taunted as he brought her meager evening meal. "Maybe you're starting to realize what happens to folks who betray their own kind." "I helped an injured child," Sarah replied quietly, her voice hoarse from thirst. "If that's betrayal, then I'll face whatever judgment comes." Bradley's laugh was harsh and cold. "Judge Harrison's got a reputation for making examples of traitors, especially pretty young ones who think they're too good for frontier justice." Meanwhile, 20 miles northwest in the rolling hills of Comanche territory, Chief Running Wolf knelt beside his nephew, Little Fox, who lay recuperating in his family's teepee. The 16-year-old warrior had returned 3 days earlier, wounded but alive, with stories of the white woman who had saved his life. "Tell me again about this woman," Running Wolf said in their native tongue, his weathered face grave with concern. At 35, he had led his band through countless conflicts with white settlers, but something about this story troubled him deeply. Little Fox struggled to sit up, his shoulder still bandaged with strips of blue fabric. "She came like a spirit, Uncle. When the railroad men's bullets found me, I thought I would die alone. But she appeared from nowhere, gentle as morning mist. Her hands were skilled like our medicine women, and her eyes held no fear or hatred, only kindness." Running Wolf examined the professional quality of the bandaging. The fabric was fine cotton, clearly from a woman's garment. "And she spoke to you?" "She said I would be all right." Her voice was soft, like a mother comforting her child. "She helped me mount Thunder and gave me this." Little Fox held up the small turquoise bead he always wore, having traded it for the bone pendant now in Sarah's possession. "I wanted her to have something to remember, that not all of my people are enemies." The chief's wife, Singing Bird, approached with fresh medicinal tea. "The boy speaks truth," she said quietly. "His wounds were treated with great skill." This white woman knew the healing ways. That evening, Running Wolf called together his war council around the central fire. The autumn air carried the scent of sage and wood smoke as the tribal leaders gathered in a circle. Grey Wolf, the eldest warrior, spoke first. "The railroad brings nothing but death and broken promises," he growled, his scarred hands gesturing toward the distant lights of Dusty Creek. "They steal our horses, kill our buffalo, and claim our ancestral lands. Why should we concern ourselves with one white woman?" But Running Wolf shook his head, his long black hair catching the firelight. "This woman showed mercy to our young warrior when she could have walked away. Honor demands we learn her fate." The next morning, Running Wolf and 2 of his most trusted scouts rode carefully toward the hills overlooking Dusty Creek. Using his army-issued field glasses, spoils from a previous raid, he observed the town's activities. Through the lens, he could see a figure moving behind the bars of the jail's single window. "There," he whispered to Swift Arrow, his war chief. "Her woman in the white man's prison." Swift Arrow squinted toward the distant building. "Could be anyone, my brother. Many women live in that place." But Running Wolf's keen eyes had spotted something that made his blood run cold. Even from this distance, he could see that the woman wore blue fabric similar to the strips that had bandaged Little Fox's wounds. As if sensing his observation, the figure moved closer to the window, pressing her face against the bars. "She looks toward our hills as if seeking rescue," Running Wolf murmured. That evening, he sent 2 of his youngest warriors into town under cover of darkness. Painted for stealth and moving like shadows, they crept close enough to the jail to hear the conversations of passing townsfolk. "Judge Harrison'll make quick work of that Indian lover," one man said to his companion as they walked past the jail. "Good riddance. Can't have schoolmarms thinking they can coddle savages and get away with it." The warriors returned before dawn with troubling news. The white woman in the jail was indeed the one who had helped Little Fox, and she faced almost certain execution when the traveling judge arrived in 4 days. Running Wolf stood at the edge of his camp as the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky. The decision before him was dangerous. Rescuing a white woman would bring the full fury of the army down upon his people, but the woman had shown mercy to his nephew when she could have let him die, transcending the racial hatred that poisoned the frontier. "What troubles you, my husband?" Singing Bird asked, approaching with quiet steps. A debt of honor, Running Wolf replied, his voice heavy with the weight of leadership. This white woman saved Little Fox's life, yet now she faces death for that act of mercy. The spirits whisper that her fate and ours are intertwined. Singing Bird placed her hand on his arm. You have always followed the path of honor, even when it leads through danger. What does your heart tell you? Running Wolf looked toward Dusty Creek, where smoke was beginning to rise from morning cooking fires. In 3 days, Judge Harrison would arrive, and an innocent woman would likely face a rope or firing squad for the crime of showing compassion. Gather the War Council, he said quietly. We have a rescue to plan. The 6th day of Sarah's imprisonment dawned with an ominous yellow sky that promised fierce weather. Dark clouds gathered on the western horizon like a massive war party preparing for battle. Sarah sat on her straw mattress, weakened by days of poor food and little water, watching dust devils dance in the street outside her barred window. Sheriff Bradley entered the jail with unusual nervousness, glancing repeatedly at the approaching storm. Judge Harrison's arriving tomorrow morning on the early stage, he announced, his voice betraying anxiety despite his attempt at confidence. Hope you've made peace with your maker, schoolmarm. I've done nothing wrong, Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. History will vindicate me even if this town won't. Bradley snorted with derision. History's written by the winners, lady, and you picked the losing side. He retreated to his office as the first rumbles of thunder echoed across the plains. By evening, the storm had intensified into a full-blown tempest. Rain lashed the jail's windows, while lightning illuminated the empty streets in brilliant white flashes. The wooden buildings of Dusty Creek groaned under the assault of howling wind that seemed to carry the voices of angry spirits. Sarah huddled in the corner of her cell, pulling her thin shawl tighter against the cold air seeping through the stone walls. Water dripped steadily from a leak in the roof, creating a growing puddle near her feet. Through the chaos of the storm, she thought she heard something else, the sound of horses moving through the night. 3 blocks away, Running Wolf and 4 of his most skilled warriors crouched behind the livery stable, their dark figures invisible against the storm-black sky. They had painted their faces with white clay and charcoal, transforming themselves into ghostly apparitions that seemed to merge with the lightning-split darkness. The storm spirits favor us tonight, Swift Arrow whispered, rain streaming down his painted face. The white men cower in their wooden lodges. Running Wolf nodded, studying the jail through the sheets of driving rain. The building sat isolated at the far end of the main street, with Sheriff Bradley's office attached to the front and living quarters above. A single oil lamp glowed in the office window, but the upper floor remained dark. Remember, Running Wolf said quietly to his warriors, we take only the woman. No unnecessary killing unless they force our hand. We are not raiders tonight. We are instruments of justice. Young Hawk, barely 18 and eager to prove his courage, shifted restlessly. What if the sheriff resists, Uncle? Then we do what we must, Running Wolf replied grimly. But our goal is rescue, not revenge. They moved like shadows through the storm, taking advantage of each lightning flash to advance from building to building. The torrential rain had turned the streets into rivers of mud, muffling their footsteps and washing away their tracks almost instantly. Inside the jail, Sarah started at a sound that seemed different from the storm's fury, a rhythmic tapping against the stone wall of her cell. She pressed her ear to the cold surface and heard it again. 3 short taps, followed by 2 longer ones, repeating in a pattern that seemed deliberate. The tapping stopped, replaced by the scraping of metal against stone. Someone was working at the mortar around one of the lower stones in the wall. Sarah's heart raced as she realized what was happening. Someone was trying to break her out. In the sheriff's office, Bradley dozed fitfully in his chair, a half-empty whiskey bottle on his desk. The storm's violence had driven everyone indoors, and he felt secure in assuming no one would venture out in such weather. The sound of crumbling mortar was lost in the thunder's roar. Swift Arrow worked methodically with a steel tomahawk, chipping away the old mortar that held the foundation stones together. The storm provided perfect cover. Each crack of his tool coincided with a thunderclap, masking the sound completely. After an hour of patient work, he had loosened 2 large stones enough to create a narrow opening. It is done, he whispered to Running Wolf. The gap is small, but the woman can pass through. Running Wolf approached the opening and spoke softly in English. Do not be afraid. We are here to help you. Sarah nearly cried out in surprise, then pressed herself close to the gap. Through the opening, she could barely make out a painted face in the darkness. fierce war paint that should have terrified her, but somehow brought only relief. "You're Comanche," she whispered. "I am Running Wolf, chief of the Blue River Band. You saved my nephew's life. Now we repay that debt." Sarah's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "They mean to execute me tomorrow." "Not if the storm spirits and Comanche warriors have their say," Running Wolf replied with grim determination. "Can you fit through this opening?" The gap was barely large enough, but desperation gave Sarah strength she didn't know she possessed. She squeezed through the opening, scraping her arms and tearing her dress, emerging into the storm-soaked night like a butterfly from a cocoon. Strong hands pulled her to safety, as Running Wolf wrapped his buffalo hide cloak around her shivering form. "Can you ride?" he asked urgently. Sarah nodded, though she had never ridden bareback in a thunderstorm. Young Hawk brought forward a gentle mare, and Running Wolf lifted Sarah onto its back before mounting his own warhorse, a magnificent black stallion that seemed unafraid of the lightning. As they prepared to leave, a door slammed in the distance. Sheriff Bradley had awakened and was stepping onto his office porch, lantern in hand, peering into the storm-lashed darkness. "Something's wrong," he muttered, his lawman's instincts overriding his whiskey-dulled senses. He splashed through the mud toward the jail, his lantern casting dancing shadows in the rain. "Go," Running Wolf commanded his warriors. "Take the woman to the first rendezvous point." Swift Arrow and Young Hawk flanked Sarah as they urged their horses into the storm, leaving Running Wolf to cover their escape. The chief waited until Bradley discovered the empty cell and began shouting for help, then melted into the darkness like smoke. By the time a dozen townsmen had gathered with guns and lanterns, the Comanche rescue party was miles away, racing through the storm toward the safety of the hills. Sarah clung to her horse's mane, rain stinging her face but feeling more alive than she had in days. Behind them, Dusty Creek erupted in chaos as Sheriff Bradley organized a pursuit party, but the storm made tracking impossible. By morning, when the tempest finally exhausted itself, Sarah Mitchell would be beyond the reach of frontier justice and under the protection of a Comanche chief who understood that sometimes honor matters more than safety. Sarah awoke to unfamiliar sounds, the soft murmur of voices speaking in a language she didn't understand, the gentle nickering of horses, and the crackling of a distant fire. Sunlight filtered through buffalo hide walls, and she realized she was lying on soft furs inside a teepee. The events of the stormy night rushed back to her as she sat up, her body aching from the harrowing ride through the tempest. "You are safe now," came a gentle voice in accented English. Sarah turned to see a Comanche woman near her own age, with kind dark eyes and intricate beadwork, decorating her buckskin dress. "I am Singing Bird, wife of Running Wolf. You have slept through the day and into the next morning." Sarah accepted a bowl of warm broth gratefully, her hands trembling slightly as she lifted it to her lips. The rich flavor of buffalo meat and wild herbs was unlike anything she had ever tasted, but it filled the hollow ache in her stomach. "Little Fox wishes to see you," Singing Bird continued, settling beside Sarah with quiet grace. "He has been waiting to properly thank the white woman who saved his life." Through the teepee's entrance, Sarah could see the sprawling Comanche camp spread across a sheltered valley. Dozens of conical lodges dotted the landscape, with cooking fires sending thin columns of smoke into the clear autumn air. Children played between the dwellings, while women worked at various tasks, their conversations creating a peaceful hum of daily life. Little Fox appeared at the teepee entrance, his arm still in a sling, but his young face bright with gratitude. He spoke rapidly in Comanche to his aunt, then switched to broken English for Sarah's benefit. "You, good woman," he said earnestly, pressing his hand to his heart. "Little Fox, alive because you help. Running Wolf say you family now." Before Sarah could respond, the chief himself ducked through the entrance. In daylight and without his war paint, Running Wolf appeared less fearsome, but no less commanding. His long black hair was adorned with eagle feathers, and his buckskin clothing was decorated with porcupine quills and silver conchos. His weathered face showed the wisdom of a leader who had guided his people through countless hardships. "How do you feel?" he asked in careful English, settling cross-legged near the fire pit. "Grateful to be alive," Sarah replied honestly, "but I fear I've brought trouble to your people. Sheriff Bradley won't give up easily." Running Wolf's expression grew serious. "Bradley and his men searched the hills for 2 days, but the storm washed away all tracks. They believe you perished in the floodwaters." He paused, studying her face carefully. "You are officially dead, Sarah Mitchell. This gives us time to decide your future. The weight of his words settled over Sarah like a blanket. Her old life was truly gone. Her teaching position, her planned return to Boston, everything she had known. Yet strangely, she felt more free than she had in months. "What happens now?" she asked. "That depends on you," Running Wolf replied. "You can remain here as our guest until safe passage can be arranged to another territory, or—" He hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "You can choose to stay and learn our ways. Singing Bird has offered to teach you, and our people would welcome one who showed such kindness to our wounded." Over the following days, Sarah discovered a world completely different from anything she had imagined. The Comanche camp operated with a complex social structure based on merit and wisdom rather than the rigid hierarchies she knew from white society. Women held significant influence in daily decisions, and children were treated with a respect that both surprised and impressed her. Singing Bird became her patient teacher, showing her how to prepare meals, work with hides, and understand the rhythms of nomadic life. Sarah's medical knowledge proved valuable as well. She treated everything from minor cuts to stomach ailments, earning the gratitude of many families. "For your hands are blessed by the healing spirits," observed Grey Wolf, the elderly war chief, as Sarah tended to his arthritic joints with techniques her physician father had taught her. "Perhaps the Great Spirit sent you to us for reasons we do not yet understand." But it was her growing relationship with Running Wolf that proved most surprising. Each evening after the camp settled down, he would visit Singing Bird's teepee to check on Sarah's progress and share stories of his people's history. She learned that he had attended the white man's school at the Carlisle Indian Industrial School for 3 years as a young man, which explained his excellent English. "They tried to kill the Indian in me," he said one evening as they sat by the fire, his voice tinged with old pain. "Cut my hair, forbade our language, punished any display of our culture. But knowledge is a weapon too, and I learned to use their own tongue and customs against them." "Is that why you rescued me?" Sarah asked. "Because you understood both worlds?" Running Wolf was quiet for a long moment, staring into the dancing flames. "I rescued you because Little Fox described eyes without hatred, hands that healed without thought of reward. In a world growing darker with each passing season, such light is precious." Their conversations revealed a man of deep intelligence and surprising gentleness beneath his warrior's exterior. He spoke of his fears for his people's future as the railroads and cattle ranches pressed deeper into traditional territory, and his desperate hope to negotiate some kind of peaceful coexistence. "The old ways are dying," he confided one night, as autumn stars wheeled overhead. "Our buffalo herds grow smaller each year, and our children ask questions I cannot answer. How do we preserve who we are while adapting to what we must become?" Sarah found herself drawn not just to his wisdom, but to his vulnerability, this powerful chief who carried the weight of his people's survival on his shoulders. When she looked at him, she saw not the savage of frontier newspapers, but a man struggling to protect his family in an impossible situation. The turning point came when a messenger arrived with disturbing news. Swift Arrow rode into camp at full gallop, his horse lathered with sweat, and his face grim with urgency. "The blue coats come," he reported breathlessly to Running Wolf. "Colonel Morrison leads 2 companies of cavalry, and they carry the railroad's gold. They seek the white woman and promise rewards for information." Running Wolf's jaw tightened as he absorbed this news. The army's involvement meant the situation had escalated far beyond a local sheriff's jurisdiction. Railroad money could buy cooperation from neighboring tribes and corrupt officials alike. "How much time do we have?" he asked. 2 days, perhaps 3 if the weather slows them," Swift Arrow replied. Sarah felt her stomach clench with dread. Her rescue had brought exactly the danger she had feared upon Running Wolf's people. "I have to go," she said quietly. "I won't let your band suffer because of me." But Running Wolf shook his head firmly. "You are under my protection now. That sacred trust is not abandoned at the first sign of trouble." He stood and called for his war council to gather. "We will not run from Morrison's gold or the army's threats. It is time to make a stand for justice." As the council fire was lit and the warriors gathered in a circle, Sarah realized that her fate had become inextricably woven with that of Running Wolf's people. The collision of 2 worlds had created something new, a bond that transcended race and culture, forged in the crucible of shared danger and mutual respect. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, under the vast canopy of stars, Sarah felt she had finally found where she belonged. The war council lasted through the night, with heated debates echoing around the central fire as Running Wolf's warriors argued over their course of action. Some favored immediate flight deeper into the territories, while others called for a fighting retreat that would bloody the army's nose. But Running Wolf had a different plan entirely. "We will not run, and we will not fight," he announced as dawn broke over the camp. "We will meet Colonel Morrison under a flag of truce and speak the truth. If we are to die, let it be with honor intact." Grey Wolf shook his grizzled head disapprovingly. "The Blue Coats do not honor truces when railroad gold is involved, my chief. They will demand the woman and threaten our families." "Then let them make their threats in the open before witnesses," Running Wolf replied firmly. "Sarah Mitchell was imprisoned without trial, condemned without evidence. If we expose Sheriff Bradley's corruption and the railroad's lies, perhaps justice can still prevail." Sarah, who had been listening from the edge of the circle, stepped forward despite the breach in protocol. "No," she said with quiet determination. "I won't let your people risk everything for my sake. Give me a horse and supplies and I'll ride north to Canada. Once I'm gone, they'll have no reason to threaten you." Running Wolf rose and faced her, his dark eyes reflecting the morning light. "You still do not understand our ways, Sarah Mitchell. When a Comanche gives protection, it is not withdrawn at the first sign of danger. Your fate and ours are bound together now." Singing Bird approached her husband and placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Perhaps there is another path," she said thoughtfully. "The white woman has brought healing to our people. Let her speak for herself when the soldiers come. Let them see who they seek to condemn." By midday, the Comanche camp had transformed into a carefully orchestrated display of peaceful intent. Weapons were hidden but within easy reach, while women and children continued their daily activities to show they had nothing to fear. Running Wolf donned his finest ceremonial clothing, a war shirt decorated with scalp locks and eagle feathers that proclaimed his status as a respected chief. Sarah wore a dress that Singing Bird had made for her, soft deerskin decorated with intricate beadwork that honored her as an adopted member of the tribe. Her auburn hair had been braided with feathers and silver ornaments, transforming her from a desperate fugitive into a dignified woman who commanded respect. The army arrived in a cloud of dust and jangling equipment, 2 companies of cavalry in blue uniforms, riding in tight formation. Colonel Morrison led the column, a career soldier with silver hair and hard gray eyes who had spent decades fighting Indians across the frontier. Behind him rode Sheriff Bradley and railroad foreman Jake Morrison, their faces grim with anticipation. Running Wolf rode out to meet them under a white flag, accompanied by Sarah and his most trusted warriors. The 2 groups faced each other across 50 yards of open ground, tension crackling in the autumn air like electricity before a storm. "I am Running Wolf, chief of the Blue River Comanche," he announced in clear English. "We come in peace to speak of justice." Colonel Morrison dismounted, his hand resting casually on his saber hilt. "I am Colonel James Morrison, commanding officer of Fort Griffin. I'm here for the white woman you're harboring, a fugitive from justice." "Justice?" Sarah stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly across the space between them. "What justice imprisons a schoolteacher without trial for the crime of showing mercy?" Sheriff Bradley spurred his horse forward aggressively. "You aided enemy combatants who killed 2 railroad workers. That's treason." "I treated a wounded boy," Sarah replied, her composure unwavering despite the hatred in Bradley's eyes. "If healing the injured is treason, then I stand guilty before God and man." Running Wolf moved his horse slightly forward, a subtle show of protection. "This woman saved my nephew's life when she could have walked away. She asked for nothing in return, sought no advantage. Is this the enemy you pursue with such fury?" Colonel Morrison studied Sarah carefully, taking in her transformed appearance and dignified bearing. "Miss Mitchell, you stand accused of serious crimes. Return with us now and you'll receive a fair trial." "Under what law?" Running Wolf challenged. "She was imprisoned without charges, denied legal counsel, and scheduled for execution without due process. Where is the fairness in such justice?" The colonel's weathered face showed a flicker of uncertainty. As a career military man, he understood the importance of proper procedure, and the chief's words struck home. "Furthermore," Running Wolf continued, producing a leather pouch from his saddlebags, "we have evidence of the corruption that drives this persecution." He scattered the contents on the ground between them, gold coins bearing railroad company markings. "Sheriff Bradley has been taking payment from the railroad to eliminate anyone who might interfere with their expansion," Sarah added. "My crime was not aiding Comanche warriors, but witnessing their brutality toward your nephew and refusing to look the other way." Bradley's face flushed red with anger and fear. "That's a damned lie. Those savages are trying to—" "Enough!" Colonel Morrison's voice cut through the sheriff's protest like a blade. He dismounted and walked forward to examine the gold coins, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "Where did these come from?" "Swift Arrow took them from Bradley's office during the rescue," Running Wolf replied calmly. 20 gold eagles bearing the Central Pacific Railroad seal, payment for services rendered against the Comanche people. The colonel's jaw tightened as he recognized the implications. Railroad companies were not supposed to be conducting private military operations against Indian tribes. That was the Army's jurisdiction. If Bradley had been taking private payments to act against the Comanche, it represented a serious breach of federal authority. "Sheriff Bradley," Morrison said coldly, "you will explain these payments immediately." Bradley's composure cracked under the colonel's steely gaze. "The railroad—" They wanted the Indian problem solved. Miss Mitchell was getting too friendly with the savages, asking too many questions about our methods. "What methods?" Sarah demanded. Bradley's words tumbled out in a desperate rush. "We've been running guns to the Apache, letting them raid Comanche camps. Figured if the tribes fought each other, they'd be too weak to resist the railroad. But you had to interfere, treating their wounded, showing them kindness they don't deserve." A shocked silence fell over both groups as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. The railroad had been deliberately fomenting violence between tribes to clear the way for their expansion, using corrupt local officials as their instruments. Colonel Morrison's face was granite hard with fury. "Sheriff Bradley, you are under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, and violations of federal Indian policy. Sergeant Williams, place this man in irons." As Bradley was led away in chains, protesting his innocence, Morrison turned back to Running Wolf and Sarah. "Chief Running Wolf, I owe you and Miss Mitchell an apology. It appears justice has been perverted by greed and prejudice." "Apologies are wind," Running Wolf replied gravely. "What matters now is the future. Will the Army honor its treaties and protect my people from railroad aggression?" Morrison nodded slowly. "You have my word that federal law will be enforced equally. The railroad will conduct no more private operations in this territory." Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders as she realized her ordeal was truly over. But as she looked at Running Wolf, she felt a different kind of weight settling in her heart. Their shared danger had forged a bond deeper than mere gratitude, and the thought of leaving this man and his people filled her with unexpected sorrow. "Miss Mitchell," Colonel Morrison continued, "you are free to return to your former life. The Army will provide safe escort to any destination you choose." Sarah looked around the circle of faces, Singing Bird's warm smile, Little Fox's grateful eyes, and most importantly, Running Wolf's steady gaze that seemed to see into her very soul. "Thank you, Colonel," she said quietly, "but I've found my home." Running Wolf's stoic expression softened with surprise and hope. "You would choose to stay among us, even knowing the hardships that lie ahead?" Sarah moved her horse closer to his, her heart pounding with the certainty of her decision. "I've learned that home isn't a place. It's where you're needed, where you can make a difference. Your people have shown me more honor and acceptance than I ever found in white society." As the Army column departed with their prisoner, Sarah and Running Wolf rode back toward the camp side by side. The future would bring challenges, the ongoing pressure of westward expansion, the struggle to preserve Comanche culture, and the difficulties of bridging two very different worlds. But they would face those challenges together, bound by mutual respect and a love that transcended the boundaries of race and culture. That evening, as the camp celebrated their victory and Sarah's decision to stay, Running Wolf and Sarah walked together under the vast expanse of stars. The autumn air carried the scent of sage and wood smoke, and in the distance a nighthawk called across the prairie. "Are you certain about this path?" Running Wolf asked, his voice gentle with concern. "There can be no going back once you are truly one of us." Sarah took his hand, feeling the calluses earned through years of protecting his people. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You saved me from a jail cell, but more than that, you showed me what it means to live with honor and purpose." Under the endless sky of the frontier, two worlds had indeed collided, but from that collision had emerged something new and beautiful, a love that proved the human heart recognizes no boundaries when it finds its true home.